Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on Pain Reprocessing Therapy, or PRT, for chronic pain and CRPS, retraining the brain's response to pain. My name is Victoria Abbott Fleming, and I'm the founder and chair of Burning Nights CRPS Support, a leading charity dedicated to complex regional pain syndrome. And I'm delighted that you've been able to join us today. At Burning Nights CRPS Support, we believe it is important to provide people living with CRPS, their families, carers, and healthcare professionals with access to a wide range of information, research, treatment options, and approaches that may help improve quality of life. Today's webinar forms part of that commitment. Pain Reprocessing Therapy, or PRT, is an emerging approach that explores how the brain and nervous system process and respond to pain. While research into PRT continues to develop and evidence related specifically to CRPS is still evolving, many people are interested in finding out and understanding more about the approach and the science behind it. As with all of our educational events, today's webinar is not intended to replace medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Instead, it is an opportunity for you to learn, ask questions, and explore the current thinking around this topic. We do encourage you to keep an open mind, listen to the information being presented, and consider how it may or may not fit in with your own experiences. Please remember, every person's journey with CRPS is unique, and what works for one person may not work for another. Please check out our website at www.burningnightscrps.org for more information about today's topic, PRT, and then other articles on managing and living with chronic pain and CRPS. And obviously, we're very grateful to today's speakers, Davies and Glennie, for sharing their expertise and experience with us today. So thank you for joining us, and I'll now hand over to our presenters.
Thanks. All right, so I'll just say a quick word about myself. I trained as a physiotherapist a long time ago, and during my career, I met a number of people with CRPS, but it wasn't as a direct person. I wasn't directly treating them, and it was always something that was quite mysterious to me. So about 6 years ago, when I was working at the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Diseases, I had a chance to work on one of the national CRPS treatment centers. It was a residential program. People would come for 2 weeks at a time, and I absolutely found it fascinating. And it created a lot of interest for me about the body, how it works, and obviously how to help people. So that's why I'm here today. That set me off in a direction of discovery. It was at the National Center where I first heard about pain reprocessing therapy. Although I wasn't able to use it in that program, I went on to work in some other clinics, and then I started my own practice, and I've been using it, including helping people with chronic pain, but also with CRPS. So that's my interest. So I'm going to get going and share some more about what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be covering, actually, you know what, before I start, it might be nice just to have Anne introduce herself too, so you know who both of us are. Is that okay, Anne, with you?
Yes, of course. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Anne, and I'm a chronic pain therapist and an advanced PRT, or pain reprocessing therapy practitioner. So every day I'm working with people like yourselves who are dealing with chronic pain. I also am a teacher and supervisor with the UK College of Hypnosis and Hypnotherapy. And I live away up in the Outer Hebrides, so I'm beaming into you now from the Isle of Lewis. Thanks, Caroline.
Yes, thank you. That's great. Okay, so back to where we were, and this time I'm going to get that right. Okay, so pain reprocessing therapy for CRPS, that's what we're here to talk about. Let's go through what our agenda is going to be. I'm going to be starting off and I'm going to be talking for about half an hour. And this is what we're going to be covering. So I'm going to be talking about our new understanding of pain and asking the very important question, how does this relate to CRPS? And then I'll be finishing with sort of considering an evolving understanding of CRPS. And then Anne's going to be covering obviously more about pain reprocessing, what that's like, what the process is like to do it. And she has a nice study to go through and explain that in more detail. I believe that we'll between us be taking probably about 55 minutes. So that gives us a good at least half an hour for questions at the end, which is really important. Okay, so just in case some of you aren't familiar with complex regional pain syndrome or CRPS for short, I wanted to just review it. And I found the best description, surprise, surprise, on the Burning Nights website. And this is what I pulled it from. Collection of symptoms occurring together in a painful part of the body. It's most often arm or leg, could be your hand, could be your foot. I do believe it can occur in other parts of the body, which will sort of in a limb. It often follows an injury, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it can just come on for no obvious reason. We understand anyone who's attending this with this diagnosis, we do understand how severe the pain can be, a sort of like off the charts pain. And it comes with a combination of other slightly complicated, slightly unusual symptoms that come with sensitivity, changes in skin color, temperature, all very alarming, changes in the way the hair or nails might grow, just changes that you wouldn't normally expect with any particular injury. And it can also become very swollen and you can lose some movement in that part of the body. So quite rightly, this description includes this statement. It's a very confusing and overwhelming set of symptoms to have. Although I don't have time to go into this, I just want to mention that it is diagnosed by the Budapest criteria, which is basically a set of tick boxes of all of those symptoms I've mentioned above. And just finally, I will mention that it has traditionally been divided into two types. There's a few different ways it's being categorized. This has been the one that I've been most familiar with, where type 1, there is no actual nerve injury. And it's really important to say that is the majority of people with CRPS. And 87 to 90% of people have no nerve injury. Type 2 is a verified nerve injury, and that's 10 to 13%. Okay, so sorry if that's just a little repetitive for some of you, but it just makes it clear what we are talking about. So both Anne and I, having worked with people with CRPS, know that it's a uniquely difficult and challenging condition to have. To start with, it's hard even to get diagnosed. It might take months, it might even take years, because the range of symptoms is so varied. It can be hard even to feel believed when you explain what you're going through to other people. Sadly, I've heard this from a number of people that they feel like even if someone's not directly saying it, that somehow they're to blame. There is nothing absolutely that's your fault about getting this condition. It's a very subconscious thing that we're going to explain some more about, but no one would ever wish upon themselves these symptoms. And then unfortunately, one of the last challenges is, of course, getting the help that you need. And that's where Burning Nights has done such a wonderful job of making it clear all the different things that are being used for CRPS and learning about it. Okay, so our goals for this webinar are to understand how pain is constructed in the brain. It's a big topic, so even if we just start to do a little understanding on that, that will be great. I hope that you might consider that CRPS symptoms are more explainable than you had thought. we're obviously going to be talking about pain reprocessing therapy and learning about how it might be able to help you. And we really hope that we can leave you with some new hope that you can recover from CRPS. Okay, so let's get into what is our new understanding of pain. This is an interview by a professor and director in a prestigious college in Massachusetts. This guy knows what he's talking about. And he describes in this interview all the things that we understand about pain now, that it's an experience constructed by the brain, that it depends on context. So what's going on at the time, what might have been going on in your life, what you might be expecting to happen next. It's only partly related to signals from the body. That's really important. And I'm going to tell you a quick story in a minute of some pain from my life, and that will illustrate this really nicely. So yes, you might have had an original injury, but the injury might have healed. But yes, you still can have pain and other symptoms, just the same as if it had been still a fresh injury. Finally, he mentions that pain is considered to be a decision by the brain. I've also heard it being called an opinion, and I quite like that. So we know that the brain has to do its best guess. It's our subconscious brain doing this, of what's going on and whether we might be in trouble or not, and need the pain alarm to be pulled. Okay, so stories can help, can't they? And this is an interesting one. I've had chronic pain in my life, so this isn't really a story about some chronic pain. It's more about some short-term neuropathic pain that I had when I was in Arizona. I lived in Arizona for 20 years, and because I like to walk around in bare feet and because I didn't like spraying a lot of chemicals around my house, I did get bit by or stung by a scorpion a few times. And it was painful. It was very painful. I did a little bit more research for this seminar, and I discovered that actually it is a nerve. They inject poison into your nervous system. So I think it can truly be called a neuropathic or nerve pain. It starts in your foot where you get, or wherever you get stung, and it went up my leg. It lasted a good 2 hours. You're pretty much out of it while that's going on. So very, very painful. It's definitely, the pain is there for a reason. It gets your attention. And then you start looking for something to squash it with, because it's bad enough being bitten by a scorpion, but going to bed at night thinking there's a live scorpion running around is definitely something you want to avoid. Okay, now here I am at the end of 2020. I moved to Bath and I got a really interesting job in the Hospital for Rheumatic Disease, National Hospital for Rheumatic Diseases. And I was in my apartment again, or my flat, walking around barefoot as usual. And suddenly I get this intense pain in my leg. It's absolutely astonishingly identical to being bitten by a scorpion, which of course in that moment made no sense. I'm looking around on the floor. I'm looking for a scorpion. I know there really aren't any in the UK. I have a sort of slight worry. Maybe there's some other poisonous spider that someone forgot to mention. But basically, I couldn't see anything. There was nothing on the floor. Nothing unusual had happened. I hadn't even noticed something until I felt the pain. I didn't have any marks on my foot. So we're going to use these two examples to explain about how pain is constructed in our brains and how to make sense of these two situations. Okay, so going back to Arizona, let's look at this. This is just a model to break it down. I get stung by the scorpion. What happens next? Bunch of nerve endings in our skin all around our body. They track everything, but there's no pain receptors in the skin. Only damage receptors. All right, that can be a bit of a surprise. I certainly was to me when I learnt about it. I spent a lot of my career thinking that there were pain receptors in the skin. That's what we were taught, and that lasted quite a long while. But these damage receptors are constantly monitoring everything, and they pick up every bit of information. So there was a lot of information going up to my brain in that moment I got stung. All of these things were firing, I'm sure. The subconscious brain, where this all happens, very quickly determines whether this is an event that requires a pain alarm. My subconscious brain knew where I lived. It knew that I'd watched my then husband get stung by a scorpion. So it was very aware that this, whatever was going on in my body, was possibly a scorpion sting. As it's our brain, it can create pain anywhere in our bodies, all right? So that's what happened. It's a new way of thinking about it. Information going up, pain gets decided in the brain. There's lots of good reasons for this that we won't get into today, but this is how we all are understanding this to work. Okay, so now it gets quite interesting, doesn't it? Here I am, and I'm having an identical experience. What on earth is going on? Right, so we know there's no pain receptors, damage. Was there any damage? I think that's a stretch. Maybe I scuffed my toe, or my toe lightly touched on a little bit of fluff. But a little bit of information can go a long way in our brain, right? I've got a memory of being stung. I've got fear, natural fear about that happening again. And I've got some background stress, and I put that in capitals because I think that might be the biggest factor of what set me up for this at that time. I haven't had this. This doesn't happen when I walk around barefoot now. So what was going on? It was the end of 2020. I was having my own personal life lockdown experience, just like everyone else was, with all the difficulties that entailed. I'd actually just moved from the US to the UK. My son, although at university, was the longest away I'd ever been from him, so that was difficult. And I moved back to the UK to be near my family, my dad, who was getting old, and couldn't see him. So there was quite a lot of stress. And then if you look next, sorry, I just lost my mouse there for a minute. The next thing, the NHS. It was, I love my jobs. They were really interesting and enjoyable, but at the weekends, some of the weekends, we had to work on the wards. I was in charge of the discharge rota, which if anyone's ever been working in a hospital knows that's not an easy job. Plus there were people with COVID on the wards. It was extremely stressful. So I just want to say, I think that probably was the worst part of it all. And we had the scorpion. So within a millisecond, my pain, out of nowhere, out of very little or even nothing, had constructed exactly the same experience. It had gone down the same pathway in my brain and created pain in my toe and up my leg. Now, here's the really interesting part. Please pay attention to this. This was a normal sensation. I was literally just walking around my flat, minding my own business with my bare feet. All right. So obviously, very different experience to CRPS, but it's an important example of what we've been talking about, pain being constructed in the brain, not necessarily related to what's going on in the body. Just because your pain and other symptoms are constructed in your brain, they are all still real. Okay, I always say this to anyone I'm working with when we go through this information. So, for example, if later on after this talk, I jump on my bike and maybe I hit a pothole, maybe I fall off my bike, if I break my arm, that pain that I'm going to have in my brain is going to be constructed the same way in the brain. It's going to have information coming from my body, but the pain is going to be constructed in my brain. Now, if there was a truck coming behind me, it might be that my brain might not construct pain in that moment. It might decide that it's more important for me to jump up and get out of the way. Okay, so there's lots of really interesting things to learn about pain. We're going to introduce the idea of some new terms. I would be interested, I don't know how many people will see, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see any of you, but if you wouldn't mind just raising a hand, maybe we can see how many of you have heard of central sensitization. How many are we seeing raising their hands if someone doesn't mind letting me know? Oh, that's good. Well, I'm seeing a few hands. Victoria, are you seeing?
We have seven hands, a couple of thumbs. Yeah, maybe 10, 12 hands, a couple of thumbs.
And how many people do we have in the audience at the moment?
59.
Okay. Okay, great. So thanks very much for that. Actually, out of curiosity, let's ask now, how many people have heard of neuroplastic pain? And Victoria, if you wouldn't mind giving me that information again, that would be really helpful.
Certainly. 10, 15, 17, 18, 20.
Okay, great. That's
22.
super. Thanks, everyone. So a little bit more neuroplastic pain. So we're going to talk briefly about it, okay? And I'm going to try and convey what it is in some sort of simple ideas. If we think about the idea that central refers to our central nervous system, and we're going to touch on this again in another slide or two. It means that it's sensitized. And what does that mean? That means that our brains tend to have different pathways they go down, and they might always be going down the pain pathways. And if you think back to my example I gave you, most likely I have a pathway in my brain that comes from being bitten or stung by a scorpion that was hardwired into my mind, and it wasn't that hard for me to go down it again. That can happen, especially when our brain might be feeling unsafe. So that's another thing that can be that can depend on perhaps on what's going on around us, what has happened to us, what injuries, etc. we've experienced. It's an analogy. There's lots of different analogies you can use, but you could think of it like the warning lights in your car that are actually always on. You know, you've taken it to the garage and had everything checked, but the warning lights are still always on. And one thing to mention again is that you can have the point of centralized sensitization is that the brain is sort of in charge and it's creating the pain experience. It doesn't even matter whether you have tissue damage in your body anymore. Okay, so central sensitization is the process, and that might be why more of you haven't heard of that. It's appearing in the medical literature, even in sort of, I'm hearing more regular doctors, GPs, consultants talking about it. But the pain that it creates is called neuroplastic pain. So it depends which way of looking at it you want to do. Central sensitization is how it happens. Neuroplastic pain is the type of pain that results from central sensitization. Okay, the important thing to mention about this is that it can be reversed, okay? So neuroplastic pain, which we're sort of talking about now, is a reversible state because it's a pathway in your brain that your nerves have gone down, but any pathway can be unlearned, a new pathway can be learned. We understand a lot more about the brain now. And that's kind of a nice thought. Just kind of imagine a pathway in your brain that you could switch to, which doesn't go through the pain centers. And we can always learn new things. It just depends on what we put our attention to. There's just so much to say about this. This is just the minimum, but hopefully it'll pique your interest and you can go off and look some more up about it. So let's go on to the next slide, I'm sure, and I welcome any questions on this when we get done, as I know it is quite a complex thing to convey. But let's try and really get this back to what we want to talk about today. How does this relate to CRPS? Okay, this is the point of this. Anne and I recently went to a lovely training in Manchester with Dr. Howard Schubiner, and he's wearing a t-shirt with an organization on it, Living Proof, which I want to give a shout out to. They are worth looking up. They share recovery stories. They run webinars for people who are recovering from chronic pain and other complex conditions like CRPS and other symptoms. And that conference was also organized by another really great organization called SERPA, Stress Illness Recovery Practitioners Association, I think. But they connect, they do training, they run training for therapists, and they connect you with people who could help with doing these kinds of approaches. Anyway, that was a bit of a long aside. But what was interesting was in the conference, a colleague stood up and asked him Dr. Schubner, who's a professor, very well known in this field. They asked, is CRPS a neuroplastic condition? And I was just so delighted they'd asked this question. And it was a very clear answer from Dr. Schubner. CRPS is a neuroplastic condition, was his response. Now, interesting timing. He's just released a wonderful book. I have not read it yet, but I know it's good because he's a wonderful man. He's very humble. He's been working for decades and decades with people with chronic pain. And I think this book is going to be a breakthrough. Now, I did look up what he said about CRPS in this book. And he said this: there are many proposed structural explanations for CRPS. And he goes on to list some of them: inflammation, autoimmunity, genetic predisposition. But I think he makes a really important point that none of these have been confirmed to be the answer. And then he makes a second point in the book: the physical changes that occur can be explained by alterations of the autonomic nervous system, which is, after all, controlled. Everything in our nervous system is ultimately controlled by the brain. Okay, so let's just dive into a little bit of anatomy. It's going to be brief, and it's going to be fairly straightforward, hopefully. But I just want to remind us, we're talking about our central nervous system is where central sensitization happens, okay, in the brain and spinal cord. So that is at the top, it's the top level, okay? Below this, we have peripheral nerves. That's the peripheral nervous system, all the blue nerves running through our body. The peripheral nervous system is divided into two systems. One deals with touching, where we are in space, our movements, our actions, very much to do with like how we interact with our external world. And the other system is called the autonomic nervous system. And that's what Dr. Schubner was referring to, that basically runs everything in our internal environment, makes sure that blood's flowing, that the swelling's going where it should do, that everything is just going smoothly in our bodies, okay? So just if you can hang in here for a bit, my point is that all of these symptoms, I'm going to come back and name them, but all of the symptoms that make up CRPS come under these two branches of the nervous system, come under the peripheral nervous system, come under the brain. Okay, so it's entirely possible for our brain to create all of these symptoms through these other parts of the body that it's running. All right, so all of the sensitivities, the slowing movement, the lost sense of connection, and then all of the blood changes, blood flow, color changes, and so on. So it's just a matter of sort of saying, yeah, our brains really do run the show. They create our experiences much more than we might ever have imagined. And although we don't have time in this webinar to get into predictive processing, I would like to just mention it and say, please do look that up. I've got an article or two on that on my website. And basically it means that the brain and the nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, the central nervous system are actually running a lot of our experiences for us. Information can go the other way, but it's more likely, especially if you're in chronic and complex pain, that it's the brain that's running your experiences. Okay. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. This next slide is a little bit heavy. That was a heavy slide, and this is a heavy one too. But just, it's a list of research, and there's no pictures on this slide, but if you can just think about this, it's really just to show you that this isn't just Howard Schubner, this isn't just Anne and I talking about this. This is now starting to really be a theme through all of the research. I'm going to start back in 2010 just with a research study that I thought was so interesting. Professor Stanton Hicks, he's a well-known person in the field of CRPS. He made a really important point. Children with CRPS tend to get better. 97% of them will get better. And I think if we're talking about something that's related to the brain, that really makes sense. You know, children do everything so much quicker than adults. Why? Because their brains are more flexible and they can learn and unlearn things much more quickly. These just, you're going to start seeing as we go through time. 2011, central sensitization is being proposed as one of 7 driving factors. Now it's being proposed to be a pathophysiological mechanism. That means basically explaining what happens in the body. They're using central sensitization. This was the University of Bath study. More recently, Taylor and et al. Just means and everyone else. It's too many people to put on the picture there. But CRPS, I think this comment's really interesting. She says, CRPS seems to cause complex neurological changes that can affect a patient's way of life similar to that of a brain lesion. Okay? We're not saying you have a brain lesion, nothing like that, but we're saying that there could be something really significantly going on with your brain and the pathways in your brain. I'm not saying you or your personality or anything like that. I'm just saying that the pathways in your brain are going to be most likely to be involved. Okay, so again, more mentions of central sensitization. Big moment, I think, really in 2022, the International Association for the Study of Pain, which is sort of like the top level pain association internationally, classified, they said CRPS is a primary pain condition. Now, that is defined as no obvious cause. So I know that a lot of you, if you have CRPS, it will have started with a very obvious injury. We don't mean this. They don't mean this. They mean that after that obvious injury is healed, we can't find any other obvious cause for why this is continuing, and therefore we are most likely thinking it's going to be a central sensitization cause. We will get through this slide. It seemed like a good idea when I organized it, but it's starting to repeat itself, isn't it? Here's another study more recently. Cortical brain reorganization in CRPS can be reversed. The fact that it can be reversed after recovery suggests that central mechanisms of chronic pain can be targeted for treatment. That means the brain. Just a couple more. Another one stating that it's now been classified as a chronic primary pain. And then last year, Lorimer Moseley, another well-known figure in the pain world, who's done a lot of work for CRPS, wrote that training the brain using mirror therapy and graded motor imagery can be effective for CRPS, emphasizes that brain mechanisms contribute to the syndrome. Right, we got through that. Let's see what's next. I'm coming to the end. This does sort of indicate that we might be having an evolving understanding of CRPS, all right? And I'm going to propose this, and someone else might have written this up in an article that I haven't read or seen, but this is something I've been thinking greatly about ever since I was working on the National Center for CRPS. And partly because getting to understand this people with CRPS and extreme cases of it really helped me to be on the lookout for all of those symptoms. And I started to notice that they were showing up in sort of slightly lesser versions and a lot more chronic pain people that I was seeing. So here's my suggestion. And this comes, again, not just from my own thoughts, but from research. We already have some central sensitization going on with acute pain. Say you cut your hand, that scar, obviously, or that area will be painful directly, but the area around it will become sensitive, more sensitive, just as a same process as it might do in other in chronic pain and CRPS. But even on the opposite hand, so you can you can have a mild injury on your right hand or your right foot, and your left hand or your left foot can become more sensitive. Your brain makes them more sensitive. It thinks maybe if they've injured their hand, they might be in trouble. There might be something else that's going to happen. So it creates more sensitivity to detect sooner that whatever might be coming away. So this is research that's been coming out recently. Again, recent research, but some I've also read in the past. Chronic pain. Sorry, there's a small error here that I didn't fix before we started. Basically, the pain starts spreading. So that's kind of interesting. So that suggests a bit more central sensitization. The pain's spreading. Multiple sensitivities, including touch and hearing. So yes, studies are showing people with fibromyalgia, people with low back pain, they're getting their central sensitivity is up. They're noticing that their skin is more sensitive. They might also have a change in their sense of where their body is in space. There's some things that are going on. It's not just pain. So when you get up to CRPS and you start to go, okay, yeah, well, the pain's even worse. Multiple sensitivities, complex symptoms, definitely body change awareness. So you might not have a sense that your foot or your hand is there, or it doesn't feel like the other one. You might even get this feeling of disconnection with that part of your body. So if you think about it, it really is a scale. And although we've got CRPS separated with its own sort of strict criteria for what it is, I believe that it would be really useful for us to include it back into the spectrum. And then, so it's partly so the people with CRPS don't miss out on the sort of breakthroughs that are happening with chronic pain and our understanding of central sensitization. Okay, we're in the last slide or two. I just want to make a point that actually some of the CRPS treatments that you might already have experienced or know about or read about, these are actually working on the brain. I mentioned a couple of these. I just want to give a shout out to cognitive multisensory rehabilitation. That was developed from treatment of people with strokes, and that is what they're trialing at the Bath National Centre, and that got me really interested. I saw people start to recover, so I will always be combining that. I think it overlaps with some of the pain reprocessing therapy. In one of my patients called it finding safe sensations. I really like that description. And there is a part of pain reprocessing therapy, if your pain is too intense, that we can go to finding neutral or safe sensations. So if you think about it, there's already work being done on the brain. So really what my point is, what might we be missing? Sorry, there's another glitch on that slide. Obviously, we're talking about what we think is missing, pain reprocessing therapy, and that's where we're going next. I'm also going to give another mention to emotional awareness and expression therapy. It's sort of like a sibling of pain reprocessing therapy. They developed along the same time. Emotional awareness and expression therapy has even more evidence showing that chronic pain, including complex pain, can be significantly improved with the therapy compared to other traditional types of therapy. So that's what we wanted to explore today. And just to finish up with, let's come back and think, well, does that change our idea of what CRPS actually is? And I'd like to propose that this is how I think about it. It's an extreme case of central sensitization. Another word for saying that it is a form of neuroplastic pain. And the wonderful thing about neuroplastic pain is that we understand it can be reversible with the right help. I have some references. I'll just leave that there for a second if you do want to screenshot that. I'm sorry they're not in a logical order, and there will be other references that I did look at and refer to for this work. So I'm just going to stop sharing. Can always come back to that if needed. Thanks very much for paying attention. I know some of that was a little hard going. Thank you, and over to you, Anne.
Caroline.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you for doing a great job of the heavy lifting there with some of those really complex topics. A little bit easier for me now. I'm just going to attempt to explain what pain reprocessing therapy actually is, what it might look like in action, and I also have a case study to go over from a lady that I worked with. So, what actually is pain reprocessing therapy? I hope that you were getting a sense from Caroline's talk that it's really hopeful what this can actually do in all sorts of chronic pain conditions and with all sorts of chronic symptoms, whether that's chronic pain, whether it's chronic fatigue, whether it's chronic symptoms such as burning, tingling, itching. It can have an amazing impact on all of these things when we start to retrain the brain, when we start to calm down that over-sensitized nervous system. So pain reprocessing therapy, in a nutshell, it's a paradigm shift in chronic pain treatment. It's using that very latest understanding in the brain science and in the brain research, the updated version of what we know about how pain is actually created in the brain. And I loved what Caroline said too about pain being the brain's opinion. So it is, in essence, a talking therapy. It's a psychotherapy, but perhaps not as you know it. I know many of you will be familiar and quite possibly disappointed with approaches such as CBT or cognitive behavioural therapy, but this is very different. It has a very different starting point because in this type of therapy, we are aiming from the beginning for resolution of pain, for resolution of symptoms. In essence, we are aiming for recovery. Because when we know that the pain or symptoms are neuroplastic, that is, they are created or maintained by the brain, then it's absolutely possible to retrain the brain, to create new neural pathways so that we can unlearn that pain. So essentially what's happened is, in all of the cases I work with, people's brains and bodies have become really good at doing pain. It's become their go-to signal, their go-to message. But through this work, through this type of therapy, it's possible to help your brain unlearn that go-to mechanism. So, do we have proof that this actually works? Yes, we do. The sort of seminal piece of research that was carried out, this was a few years ago now in 2021, got quite a long name. I won't read it out. You can see it on the screen. But this is most commonly referred to as the Boulder Back Pain Study. And this is the first proper randomized controlled trial into pain reprocessing therapy. And actually, the results of this are, well, nothing short of astounding. I'll walk you through what they did. So it's a randomized control trial. There was 151 patients involved, and they were split into 3 arms in this study. So we had 50 people randomly assigned to pain reprocessing therapy. We'd 51, don't know why, to the placebo arm. Those 51 people were given saline injections into their back. The remaining 50 were just usual care. These were the sort of the waitlist control, if you like. They were just carrying on as usual. All of the people in the study had had back pain for an average of 10 years. What we can see here in this graph, perhaps the most interesting thing that we want to pay attention to, is what happened to the people that got PRT. These people in this particular study, this was carried out over a month. People had 2 sessions of PRT with a highly trained therapist, actually the creator of the approach, Alan Gordon, twice a week. So they only actually had treatment for 1 month. But after that 1 month, what we can see, this massive dip in pain, is here in the people in the pain reprocessing therapy arm of the study. And this, massive downshift in pain was maintained 12 months later. Even though it was only a month long, 98% of people in the PRT arm had some level of pain reduction, but 66% of participants here in the PRT arm actually became pain-free or nearly pain-free. It was so unexpected, so unusual, they had to create a new category of 0 to 1 for having low to no pain following their treatment. So this was a really, honestly amazing, astounding set of results, obviously here in this case with chronic back pain. So there are limitations over what we can claim over it. However, what we are seeing anecdotally and clinically with people with all sorts of chronic pain and chronic symptoms is they are also seeing reductions and even resolution of their symptoms too. What was perhaps even better is that this study was followed up again 5 years later, and they went back to revisit those original 50 people that had had PRT to see where they were. Was this maintained, or did it, like other treatments such as medications, such as steroid injections, such as, let's say, nerve ablation because nerves grow back, was it maintained? And what you can see here, we've just added on this 5 year where people were afterwards. So yes, largely those results were maintained 5 years later, even though they'd had nothing in between. All they'd had were those 8 original treatments 5 years ago. And if you look here at the pain scores, and we can see that lovely big blue curve there, those are the people with low to no pain. There's 13 people here that don't have pain anymore following this. The rest of the people have much lower pain, especially compared to the placebo and especially compared to usual care as well. So it was lovely to have this piece of research confirming what we were seeing in clinic and what we were hearing from patients and clients as well. So what does that actually involve? What were they doing in those sessions that those people were attending with Alan Gordon or with any of the other therapists they were working with? Well, there's kind of 4 sort of core principles, I suppose you could call them, that run through pain reprocessing therapy. And the first one is learning about pain. And Caroline today has shared a lot of that new emerging brain science with you today, what we are realizing about just how the brain works when it comes to pain. So there's a lot of education around pain, how it behaves, how it responds, and how we're involved in that picture as well. So we learn a lot about neuroplasticity, and we learn as well about that central sensitization. We also learn then to begin to feel safe again in our bodies. We learn to begin to have a reduced fear of pain. Because once we understand this idea that when we've got central sensitization, it means that my brain is hypersensitive. My brain is overprotective. And that means we can teach it that, okay, well, there's not any reason for you right now to be oversensitive or overprotective. We can say, well, yeah, I am experiencing discomfort, I am experiencing sensation, I am experiencing pain, but I know it's you, brain, and I know this isn't dangerous. So we can start to have this changing idea that actually my body isn't broken, there's nothing wrong with me. My brain has got the wrong end of the stick and it is perpetuating. We're caught in this loop or this cycle of prediction, really. So we begin in small ways to learn to feel safe again, to reattribute pain and its causes, that it's not my body's not broken, I'm not broken. My brain's making a mistake and I've become caught in this cycle. And we take that a little bit further and we use tools to retrain the brain or rewire the brain. Tools like somatic tracking that you may or may not have heard of, but this is a type of, I guess you could call it a mindfulness exposure exercise where we track sensation in the body and where we start to teach the brain, like in real time, there's no need to be afraid of this sensation in the body right now. The other thing, of course, that's important when central sensitization is involved is beginning to down-regulate and help train the nervous system, start to switch it from, if you like, protection mode, which it can be stuck in, back into safety mode. And then the other thing that's a kind of core principle is dealing with thoughts and emotions and all of the things that go alongside that. So this sort of learning, this education, it builds over the sessions. The sorts of things that we might cover, is how pain works, how the nervous system works. Caroline covered that in a lovely way today, obviously going over sort of central sensitisation. And she touched on as well, she didn't use these words, but multi-sensory sensitisation. And that's another thing we really see extremely commonly with people who suffer with chronic pain. And that's where we become extra super sensitive to all of our senses. So some of you may be aware of or might notice that you're super sensitive to light or to smell or to sound. And that can be another sign that the system is on high alert or on red alert. How the brain predicts pain is something that we teach about and cover. How our thoughts, emotions and behaviours can help or hinder what our brain thinks it should be doing. We cover something called extinction bursts, which is what we see when pain starts to fade, when it starts to be on the way out. Your brain might come back in and check, do you still need me? And how to deal with those. And then obviously as well, we deal with, how do we deal with the relapse? How do we deal with this if it should ever come back? So that people feel fully prepared. They go back out into the world with really a new understanding of pain, of the brain, but also a toolkit of approaches and things they can use that help them feel empowered in their daily life. So this is, I suppose, really at its essence considered a short-term therapy, because you've been given all of the tools you need to go away and carry on this work on your own. I just wanted to illustrate, if I can, in some way, like, how can my brain be making a mistake? Well, if you're looking at this slide now, be interesting to see what you notice. But perhaps you're seeing, and this is just a flat 2D image, it's not a GIF, it's not a video, you might be seeing like a black circle that appears to be moving in and out, that it's getting bigger and smaller, or it's kind of pulsing in some way. But that's not actually possible because this isn't a 2D image. So if you're seeing some sort of pulsing going on, what's actually happening here is your brain sees that dark spot. When you focus on it, your brain thinks you're going into a dark room. So your brain prepares by opening your pupils to let more light in. So this is why you are getting that impression that that image is moving when it's not. Your brain is trying to protect you, but essentially it's making a mistake because that picture isn't moving. That same process, just in a different way, is at work when your brain is essentially sending a false alarm, almost like a car alarm. When a car alarm becomes so sensitive, like you don't even need to brush past the car, but the alarm starts going off. So the whole point, I suppose, of pain reprocessing therapy is resetting the entire system, taking you from danger back into safety. Because when we do that, and when we lower the fear, that's when the pain can start to reduce and can essentially start to switch off. And perhaps the best way to explain it, I use this slide when I'm working with young people and teenagers, that we're helping your brain shift from that protection mode back into safety mode. So I'm going to take you through a little case study just now. I need to point out this is Helen, not her real name. And this is not really Helen, this is AI Helen. And I do have permission to share her story. Now this is Helen's journey. Everybody's journey, no matter what they're dealing with, will be different. I often say to clients, we don't know your journey before we begin. It's something we have to discover together. So just bear that in mind. Everybody's starting point will be different for this type of work as well. But in Helen's case, when I met her, she was newly retired. She was 64 years old. She'd had keyhole surgery on both knees in November 2023. Now, in some ways, you'll know what I mean by this, in some ways she was fortunate to get a very early diagnosis of CRPS. What, of course, she was seeing is familiar to you, sort of heat, burning, that intense pain. She was also seeing in both knees that at times they were red, swollen, sometimes they were turning black, sometimes they were mottled. A shower seemed to be a particular trigger in Helen's case as well. But so severe she couldn't even have fabric touching it. She was permanently wearing shorts. Prior to this, she'd been extremely active. She was a keen coastal walker. She was always doing gardening. She was volunteering. She was doing dancing. I mean, she was a very, very busy lady. She was under the care of a pain consultant and a psychologist when I met her. She'd already tried lots of things like injections and nerve blocks, but nothing had lasted. And she was obviously in a place of feeling really, I mean, as an understatement, sad, right? There was a lot of grief because here she was newly retired, and this wasn't what she had planned for her life at all. However, she was hugely determined, and when I met her for the first time over Zoom, we had a free consultation together, she said, "I'm determined." And she said, "I've got the time to do this, and I want to dedicate the time to doing it and learning about this approach." So she was really keen, her family were keen and supportive, and she was also aware of, let's call it a mind-body connection. She'd already had a previous recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome, so she felt really motivated and bolstered by that. She felt she knew this was possible. She'd also had, from my perspective, this is a really big tick in the box, she'd had periods where there was actually no pain present at all, not often, but there was periods where she said, yeah, when I was away on holiday, she said there were times where I didn't notice it at all. So she was, let's say, starting from a really positive starting point here. Our first session, this will look pretty similar, whoever you work with, and I'll just put a wee sort of disclaimer there. All PRT practitioners work in a slightly different way. We'll all have different backgrounds. I tend to have a more therapeutic therapy approach because I also use hypnotherapy. I will use elements of CBT and acceptance and commitment therapy. Caroline, of course, brings all of her, almost 30 years experience in physiotherapy to the table. So we're all using the same core concepts and principles, but we'll all approach this in a slightly different way. So in a first session, what I would tend to do is have a real look at that full medical history, so we really know what's going on. We would rule out structural issues. We'd be looking for evidence of, is this pain neuroplastic? We would agree goals, and that would be different in everybody's case, depending on where you're starting from. I've got some people that I work with that we're starting to, can you walk from here in your house? Can you walk from your front door inside your house to the bedroom door in your hall? And then can we build up to walking from that door to the end of your hall? I've got another lady that I'm working with, different case, it's fibromyalgia, where we started working from her front door to her gate outside. So we start wherever feels safe and comfortable for you, and we build things up gradually. I always, just the way I work, I always tend to have an intervention in session at the end. So in a first session, I would always provide time for relaxation. So we're beginning to start to lower that nervous system alert. And I always recommend for everyone that I work with reading a book called The Way Out by Alan Gordon. This will be in your handout, so you don't need to write it down, but this is written by Alan. He's the creator of Pain Reprocessing Therapy, and it's a lovely, accessible, funny, actually, read about his experience with chronic pain and about how pain reprocessing therapy can help. So I highly recommend that if today's presentation has piqued your interest at all. You can hear it, it's on Audible as well, so you can even hear Alan himself and his lovely warm voice reading it to you. What else might sessions involve? Sort of key or core practices would be nervous system regulation. Somatic tracking I've put in bold because that's really the the start of the show, I suppose, in pain reprocessing therapy, where we learn to attend to our symptoms through a new lens, a lens of safety, that this isn't dangerous, this is just my brain, this will pass, I'm going to be okay. That's the type of process that's involved. We learn to deal with thoughts and feelings. We will also have a kind of graded exposure going on that will be right for that person and their circumstances, where we start to build back in some activities that they want to do again. Most recently, the one that just popped into my head is a lady I was working with who had, well, got a lot of different pain going on with fibromyalgia, but she wanted to do jigsaws again. So that was one of the very first things that we brought back in and put it back on the menu. But we started with having one jigsaw out and putting one jigsaw piece in a day and helping her brain realise this isn't dangerous. We're just putting one piece of jigsaw in, so there's no reason for your shoulder to complain. It's your brain that's doing it. We'll let it help it feel, help it know that it's safe. I also tend to do quite a bit of relaxation training and mindfulness as well in my sessions. And along the way, often people will have to do just some home tasks, right? What you do in between session is just as important. I will sometimes get people to keep a daily diary. I might get them to do some formal practice where they listen to an audio, informal practice where they respond to their symptoms with safety. And then I'll get them to keep track of any evidence, any green shoots, any little wins or lovely moments, as I call them, of things being slightly different, of things beginning to change. Also, because I do clinical hypnotherapy, I will use that in my work as well to help with symptom control, to help with pain relief, to imagine your future self doing these activities that you want to get back to, and also working up to graded exposure in the imagination first can really help as well. Caroline mentioned emotional awareness and expression therapy. That is, if you like, another offshoot of pain reprocessing therapy, which, if required, and it is for some people, delving a bit more deeply into emotions and releasing those things, and some really excellent research around that, but too much to go into to share with you today. So what did it look like for Helen going through this process? So it was small at first. I mean, she would come in and she would say, I know it's a small thing, but it feels really significant. And these are significant things when you are, dealing with CRPS. She had been unable to cross her legs, and she came in and she was able to say, I'm actually able to cross my legs now. So this gives you a flavour of the type of progress and how it's gradual at first. She was able to go to Marks and Spencer's. She was able to be dropped off at the door, go in and buy a birthday card. Gradually, she started to get out and about a little bit more for shorter walks. Her husband had to take over cooking entirely in the house, but she was now able to stand again to make a curry. Eventually, she was wearing tracksuit bottoms again instead of shorts. She was able to tolerate that feeling of fabric on the skin. And then a really big moment was one week when she came in and she said, when I was in the shower, she said, I realised that my knees feel like my knees again. So that was huge. And she was also beginning to have moments with no sensations at all, with no sensation present. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but we're okay. Okay, thank you, Lisa. This is a good story to illustrate what sort of things do we talk about in session. So one time, obviously I'm finding out from people, how's your week going? How have things been? What's changing? What's different? And Helen was saying to me, well, I was doing a bit of ironing, not much, but then the pain came on really strong in my knees. And I said, what did you do? And she said, well, of course, I stopped ironing. And I went and I sat down. I was like, okay, that's ironing finished for today. I said, okay, very natural, very understandable reaction. I said, but what do you think your brain learned from that? And she thought about it for a minute, and then she said, oh, I think my brain learned that ironing is dangerous. And I said, yes. And your brain thinks it's just done a great job. Your brain is thinking, what a great job I've done. I've just kept Helen safe from doing any more ironing. And I said, what do you think will happen the next time you want to go and do some ironing? And she said, I think my brain might try and protect me. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So what do we do? I said, well, in this case, I said, the next time that happens, lean into your tools, lean into reassurance, lean into safety and saying, brain, I know it's you, but we are fine. This might be uncomfortable, but it is not dangerous, and I know it's temporary. I'm going to do one more t-shirt. So you start to do things on your terms. You don't want your primitive brain running the show. This is about you taking back control. So then we progress through sessions, and then Helen starts to say, do you know what? I was able to clean for an hour and a half. I mean, huge apologies that this is all about chores and cooking and cleaning and ironing, but this is what progress looks like when we start to get those daily activities back. And then she was able to walk, not far away, but to a small supermarket for flowers. Previously, her grandchildren could not climb on her. People would have to keep their distance because she would have her feet up on the sofa at all times and couldn't have anyone near her. But the grandchildren were now climbing on her, in her words, like a ladder. She was no longer afraid of accidentally knocking her knees on something or knocking her knees together, which had been a huge fear at the beginning. And she was even able now to straighten her legs and touch her toes. And 1 week she came in towards the end apologising and saying, I'm really sorry, but I've not practiced this week. And I said, I'm sorry, but you don't need to apologise for not practicing. If you're too busy, that's what we are here for. So this was really lovely to see. And by the end of our treatment together, I worked with Helen for, I think it was around 3 months. We had achieved the goal that we set out to achieve, which was walking into town a short way and back. And she also managed to do all the things we discussed in her hypnotherapy session, her recovery blueprint, which included walking with her husband, having a coffee, working in the garden. And she was actually able to do quite heavy physical branch work without any sensations. When I checked in with Helen a month following our end of sessions, so 4 months later, she had sort of this long-term goal had been unlocked of going back to her coastal walking when she was on holiday. And I've just got her words here from an email she sent me. Last week, I started back at the gym at a very slow pace to try and build up some muscle. So the lovely moments have become huge and I'm starting to enjoy life again. So while everyone's journey is different, I'm hoping that that provides some inspiration, but also gives you a greater flavour of what does PRT, what does pain reprocessing therapy actually look like. Hopefully, Caroline and I have whetted your appetite. If you want to find out more about this, these are 3 books that we both highly recommend. They are on the handout sheet as well, so you don't need to write them down. This one, Unlearn Your Pain by Dr. Howard Schubiner, it just came out on Thursday. It's the new edition. Make sure you get the new one and not the old one. This is a more interactive process. It's like a workbook and you work through if you like that approach. And this is by Vanessa Blackstone. She is the executive director of the Pain Psychology Centre in California. She works alongside Alan Gordon, who is the author of The Way and the creator of Pain Reprocessing Therapy. So I did put this in the chat earlier, but I'll put it in again. And I know that Victoria is going to send it out with the recording links, but Caroline and I have tried to put down all the sort of key resources that we feel might be a good start if you want to look at this a little bit more. And also in exciting news, Vanessa Blackstone that I just mentioned, she's going to be opening a UK branch of the Pain Psychology Centre. So it's Alan Gordon's work opening a branch of the centre in the UK, and it's going to be opening this summer. And that link is on your handout as well. So thank you so much for listening today. If you want to get in touch with me at any time, my details are on screen. I think I've gone over time. I apologise. I hope that's been useful for you today. Thank you.
Thank you to you both. Really, really insightful and fantastic. And as you can see in the chat, there's quite a lot of thanking you as well, and some comments about well presentation. So thank you all, and thank you. So we do have some questions for you. Is there any similarity between EAET and AEDP therapy?
I'd have to look up could someone share what AEDP therapy is? I'm probably not going to be able to answer those questions. I don't know what that is.
I think that was Stacey. Is she here still? Stacey, you still here?
It's emotional awareness and expression therapy and accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. They're similar, but both are different in terms of the goals.
Both sounded very similar.
Processing deep emotions, but they target very different primary conditions and use distinct therapeutic approaches.
So I'm wondering if I can direct or help direct my therapist to maybe more align with the EAET. Because the description of the EAET sounded very similar to her approach with my therapy.
Maybe
I'll just...
Is that okay?
Please.
With you, Anne? Yeah, I think definitely make your therapist aware of EAET, emotional awareness and expression therapy. There's some really great studies where they explore sort of like the mechanisms by which we understand emotions can make a difference to pain. So I'd recommend that. I meant, when I did some research on this therapy, there's a lot of sort of, it's like a web, isn't it? There's quite a few different things that have similar or slightly different names, but are having a similar approach. For me, the thing that I really loved about emotional awareness and expression therapy is it brings emotions in the room. And I think any therapy that is doing that is going to be helpful. And that's what we've been missing. So hopefully that's helpful.
And that's why I brought it up, because it did sound very similar as far as the emotional component of the EAET.
Yes.
Okay, I'll ask her to look into it. See.
Question number 2. Does pain reprocessing therapy have a minimum number of sessions in order to be effective? Does it have a maximum number of sessions that are beneficial?
Will I go for this one, Caroline? I mean, there's no such thing as typical, but if in a typical scenario, when I'm working with, let's say, a general population, I will normally say to people, round about 8 to 12 sessions would be what I would consider a minimum effective dose. But then it depends on the person. It depends on what they're dealing with. I have clients where 5 sessions have been enough and they're sorted. Even I had someone with 40 years of lower back pain and 5 sessions was enough and they were sorted, right? I mean, I know how unbelievable that sounds coming out of my mouth, and I am constantly surprised by what I see in the results that clients get. But I also equally have some longer term clients. I've got someone that this month, in fact, I will have been working with them for a year, and that's someone that has fibromyalgia. It's a more complex presentation, and they also have, let's say, more complex life stressors and some complex childhood issues. So it means there's more there to unpack, there's more there to consider. So it will depend on the person and what they're dealing with. But sometimes how long you've had it and the severity don't always need to be. And sometimes people will come in and say, well, I know if I've had it for 15 years, it's going to take 15 years for this to resolve. And I will say, well, not necessarily, right? We don't know the journey before we begin, and sometimes we can be very surprised about how quickly things can move.
And coincidentally, the next question is, I've had CRPS for 14 plus years. Can pain reprocessing therapy now help me? And if yes, where would I go to get it?
Shall I jump in? Yes, I absolutely would say yes to that first question. Can it help after 14 years? I think it was a really good answer Anne gave. I've certainly seen people 20, 40 years of pain who've made significant gains. And CRPS, yes, it might be a little bit more complicated. There might be a little bit more work to do, but yes, you can get better. Where do you find help? Well, obviously, both Anne and myself work doing this therapy, but we also understand that people need to have lots of different choices. There's on the PDF, there is a list of practitioners, and that's the official list of people who've been trained as pain reprocessing therapists. And that is with the Pain Reprocessing Center. Is that right? Anne, am I getting that name right? Is it the Pain Reprocessing Center?
Yeah, they keep changing the name, but yeah, Pain Reprocessing Therapy Centre. Yeah, I think that's the one. But they have a directory of practitioners, and they have a world map, because obviously we don't just have people from the UK today, but you'll be able to see that spread of practitioners and choose someone that's working near you.
There is a follow-up question from the exact same person. So Han CRPS 14 plus years it's not just about the pain, it's the deterioration of muscles, etc.
Yes, absolutely. It's all of it. But it's very hard, isn't it, to build up muscles until you have less pain. So, I always think that that's the second part. There's no problem building up muscles. Muscles are wonderful. They come back to life even after a long period of not being very well used. It's all about the pain and the symptoms, and that's what we'd focus on. And then that naturally makes it easier for you to exercise.
Is pain reprocessing therapy able to help with MCAS, POTS, and chronic inflammatory response syndrome?
I can answer that. Do you want? Shall I start? I've worked with someone with MCAS who this did help. So yes, I can say confidently that helps. MCAS is actually mast cell activation syndrome. You also mentioned other autoimmunity conditions and POTS. I'll come to POTS in a minute. The autoimmune conditions is a sort of extra sensitive immune system, so I do believe it's all related. Sensations like itchiness in the skin are constructed in the brain, and more likely to be constructed if you have a sensitive nervous system. So yes, it all can be treated. I don't think it's been written up as much, but I think you could probably find some more articles or possibly case studies on that. The POTS, I think, is a very interesting one. It stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia.
Tachycardia syndrome.
I launched into that before I realized whether I could finish it. I think that that's something that would take a little bit more explanation. Yes, I do think it's part of all of these symptoms, but it's a little bit more. I have heard some good explanations of it, but I don't think I can do justice to it in a quick response. But maybe Anne can. I'm glad to pass that one over if you've got anything to add.
I don't have anything to add other than to say sort of MCAS and POTS would kind of come under that sort of neuroplastic heading. So even if it's not neuroplastic pain, we can think about neuroplastic symptoms, and that for me would fall into that category or that bucket of chronic symptoms that are somehow being maintained.
There is a episode with Dr. Howard Schubiner, and I think it might be with Dr. Chatterjee, but I need to check that. And that does address the symptoms that you just mentioned, including POTS.
So there's somebody who's also put, I can't actually visualize or picture things in my imagination. Like when you say visualize a beach, I can't do that. Would PRT still work?
I'll let Anne answer that.
Well, yeah, PRT doesn't need to involve any visualization. You're just working with yourself, your body, what's going on inside yourself, really. If we're thinking about hypnotherapy, that's slightly different. That does involve use of the imagination, but it doesn't necessarily need to involve visualization on a visual level. It can be have the feeling as if you're at the beach. Use your other senses to, how would it feel if you were lying on a beach right now? How relaxing would that be? How would your breath change if you were lying on a beach right now? So there's other ways in, if for people who have, let's say, aphantasia, if they, can't imagine pictures in their head. So it's absolutely not a barrier in any way. And whoever you work with, they will personalise treatment just for you. And I think that's what's so beneficial about this process. It's tailored to the person themselves that you are working with, to whatever is coming up most strongly for them.
And there was another question along similar lines. Is there anybody that wouldn't be suitable for PRT? Thinking of neurodiversity in particular.
Neurodiversity, definitely. I still would love to understand more about, but I understand that there's many sort of complex ways that pathways can go through the brain, and maybe more pathways if you have neurodiversity. There could be some extra challenges. I actually do see a lot of people who I would say are neurodiverse, but it doesn't stop us from making progress. It just maybe requires some creativity and perseverance. The other question, there was another part to that question, wasn't there?
There was one that was about, about being unable to visualize things.
Okay. Sorry, I think.
Or I mean, I'm speaking for myself in particular, so I don't recognize my own emotions. I'm autistic. I don't recognize my own emotions. And you did mention about emotions and being in touch with your emotions. I can't even name emotions.
It's, everyone has a different set of emotional experiences and expressions and feelings. And we have learned a lot about emotions that they're not like a set category. So it's very variable according to the family you grew up in, the culture, your experiences. And so, emotions are quite an interesting topic, but it's not unachievable to learn how to discover emotions or express new ones, or even get to the root perhaps of some things that are difficult, even if you haven't expressed them in an emotional way before. I think it's very possible.
We have two more questions. So I was under the impression that there is currently still no cure for CRPS, but you say people can get better. I'm currently wheelchair bound, having previously been fully independent. Can I go back to independence and walking, please? And if so, how do I do this without causing huge flare-ups in pain?
I'll have a go answering that. Yes, I'm so sorry you've had such a difficult experience. Yes, CRPS is a curable, reversible condition. I'm convinced in that. I've seen it enough times. I know it's not easy. I know that there can be a significant number of challenges at all kinds of levels, and it might feel like overwhelming at the moment, but really the framework, like we've been talking about, of understanding these symptoms is such a good place to start. And it's what's been missing, unfortunately, in our approach to pain. We've been very pain management throughout sort of the standard NHS approach. And this is a new way of understanding the symptoms, which gives you hope. Hope is hugely important, and hope can lead to small steps towards yes, recovering and learning, getting back to walking again.
And the final question should be quite an easy one. Is PRT available via the NHS?
Sorry to jump in again, and please join in if you have anything to add. No, not at the moment. I've definitely been trying. I've gone for several jobs talking about it in pain management teams, but they're not quite there. But truthfully, there isn't quite enough evidence. The NHS has to have a significant body of evidence. So even if anecdotally we both know that it will and can help people with CRPS, we need to build up the research so that then can be offered to the NHS. The EAT, the Emotional Awareness and Expression Therapy, does have enough research to be included. But I just hope, I think it is being picked up here and there around the edges, but not in any systematic way.
And that's it. I'm all questioned out unless you saw any more, Victoria, while I was answering them, asking them, sorry.
No, and Lucy hasn't either. So,
Awesome.
no, obviously there's a few comments in there about, for example, the GP, but we'll deal with those. If anybody's got any more questions, now's your chance to ask our two presenters anything about PRT before we lose them. Georgina, we'll, once we finish recording, if you want to hang on for a couple of minutes, we'll answer your question for you.
I was just getting her a link.
Thanks. Otherwise, if there's nothing else from anyone, thank you ever so much to both you, Caroline and Anne,